So this is something a little bit different, and it's something I've been thinking about doing for a while, and I feel like this is a good enough opportunity. I want to start talking about books a little bit. I'm a pretty avid reader, read a lot of everything, but I just finished Fire in the Lake by Fitzgerald. It's a book about the American involvement in the Second Indochina War, really. I don't know if that fully sums it up. It's really a story about, or not a story, it's a nonfiction book about the politics of South Vietnam, and a little bit of North Vietnam, but the North Vietnam part is at the beginning, and it's kind of the First Indochina War, kicking the French out, with the Viet Minh and Ho Chi Minh during the 50s, and then it goes into the American side of the war. And I was looking for kind of a broad overview of the entire war. I've read America's War in Vietnam. I'm looking at it up on my shelf. And that was kind of a broad strategic look at what was going on in the war. A little politics, a little military. I wanted something just as broad, but with some more detail, I guess. This wasn't the book I was looking for. That's not to say it's a bad book. And I actually just bought, I can't remember the name of it, a book that kind of goes more into the military side of the war. This book just focuses on the politics of South Vietnam during that conflict. It talks about what effect the Americans had on the economy and the political scene in South Vietnam with the Diem regime, the Key regime, and the guy who was between those, Key or Kai, his vice president, for lack of a better term, who was in charge before him. But it doesn't talk about the politics of North Vietnam at the time, and maybe there's not a lot to talk about with the Viet Minh winning their side of the first Indochina War, with Ho Chi Minh in charge. Maybe there's not a lot to talk about, but I'd like to read something about it. It also doesn't talk about the politics in the US at the time. And I think I would like to read a book about that. Pretty turbulent. The book also was written in 72? One second. I think it was written in 72. Yeah. Published in 72, so maybe it was finished at the end of 71. So the war wasn't even over yet. And the kind of book it is, it would have been nice to have her talk about the effects of after the war. And in this edition, there's an afterword written by her in 2000 that talks a little bit about a visit she made, and by that time North Vietnam had kind of gone back to a little bit more traditional ways. South Vietnam was recuperating more than she had expected. She visits away, she visits a couple of villages. But that's kind of a personal little interlude, which is nice. But she doesn't revisit the politics. And maybe, I see she has another book written, I assume later, called Vietnam Spirits of the Earth, and maybe that covers that part. And I think I would be willing to read another book written by her in the same spirit, kind of wrapping it up. I want to, and maybe she's not the best one to say it, kind of, that 72 to 75, and then like 75 to 85, or 75 to 99, when things kind of start turning around a little bit. It's definitely worth a read. It took me, it's 450 pages. It took me about 6 weeks. Nonfiction really tends to slow me down. I just read Dreadnought, which is like 1,000 pages, a couple weeks ago, and that took me 2 months, 10 weeks, something. But if you're interested in Vietnam in general, and the wars that went on in Vietnam, Fire in the Lake's good, but it's not going to talk about the military aspects of the war. It's just focusing on kind of what the effect of the wars had on South Vietnam, which I guess maybe I don't really read the backs of books. I know it's about Vietnam, so I pick it up and I'm going to read it. With nonfiction books, with fiction books, I tend to do the same thing. I pick it up because it looks interesting. I try not to read the back of the book because I like to go in. I don't watch movie trailers either. I like to go in kind of cold. So maybe reading the back of it, I still haven't read it. That would have clued me in. So it wasn't necessarily what I was looking for, but that doesn't mean it's not good. And I would definitely recommend it if you're interested in the political side of that conflict. So that's Fire in the Lake by Francis Fitzgerald.